Today on the Take On Board podcast, I'm speaking with Genevieve Gregor about the turnaround of Noumi, well, as much as she's able to tell us. So, before we start on the podcast today, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we record. For me, I am on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I also pay my respects to any First Nations people who may be listening today. I acknowledge their continuing connection to land, waters, skies, culture, and country. I support Voice, Treaty and Truth for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and I encourage others in the Take On Board community to do the same. Now, let me introduce Genevieve. Genevieve is on the boards of Noumi Limited. In fact, she's the chair of Noumi Limited, External Holdco Limited, Money Tech Group Limited, and Maneuver Limited. She's previously been on the boards of Western Sydney University and a whole range of other portfolio company boards. Genevieve has spent her career working in private capital in both a lending and investing capacity, having worked for Goldman Sachs and Citigroup. She's now working as a non-executive director with the portfolio that I mentioned before. Genevieve is a part-time senior advisor to TPG Capital, a global alternative capital manager. Genevieve, welcome to the Take On Board podcast.
Oh, thank you, Hellion. It's a pleasure to be with you, and thanks for inviting me on and the opportunity to talk to you.
Oh, it is fantastic to hear some of these stories. We love a good story here at Take On Board. But before we dive on into that, as always, I would like to dig just a little bit deeper about you. Can you tell me a story about young Genevieve that tells us a little bit about how you got to where you are today?
I would call myself a country girl at heart, actually, and born in country Queensland. Grew up on a cattle property. My parents were graziers, cattle farmers, and it's interesting that they grew up in the era where you didn't talk about money, and or more specifically, you never talked about money pressures, and especially men from the country. It was quite a stoic persona that they adopted. So essentially, my parents grew their business too quickly. And one of the things that they did, they bought a very large cattle property early on in their marriage. And actually, it was Curtis Island, which is off the coast of Gladstone. There's a large cattle property on there called Monte Cristo. And they took on too much debt. And in the early 70s, when the interest rates doubled through the oil shocks, they went from 5% to 10%. And unfortunately, they lost their properties to the banks, and unfortunately, they divorced as a result of, I guess, the financial pressure.
Yeah.
So when you dial this forward to today, it's kind of ironic that the thing that brought my parents unstuck, if you like, too much debt, is where their daughter has made a bit of a career in corporate finance and debt restructurings and turnarounds. So I think it'd be interesting. My dad passed away about 25 years ago, and I think he would have a wry smile about what I do now. So yeah.
Yes.
that's I guess a little bit of what shaped me.
That is so interesting and ironic, or perhaps not a surprise, because you've seen the impact of no money conversations and not talking about it and so on. Do you think that was a conscious thing for you in choosing that career around, dealing with money well and knowing the turnaround process and so on? Was that in the back of your mind, or consciously or subconsciously?
Possibly subconsciously, but one thing I didn't want to do is not have those mistakes in my life, if that makes sense. So running towards a better understanding and running towards, the problem is probably something that I think I've tried to adopt as opposed to not talking about it.
So you're the chair of Noumi. You've maybe talk us through how you ended up on that board, and in as much detail as you're able to share. There's, you've done some turnaround work there. So maybe, well, first up, tell us how you landed in their boardroom and in the chair role, and then we'll talk about some of the challenges.
Yeah, look, the way I landed up on the board is not uncommon process. Really, it was a board rejuvenation process that the prior board was going through. A headhunter approached me. A work colleague recommended me. And I guess the process of joining the board was really about the passion I have for Australian food businesses and also Australian farming businesses, and really trying to support the people around those businesses. I guess in a given my background, that makes sense, right? So it wasn't anything crazy how I got on the board. It was a pretty normal process, I think. But moving into the chair role was something that's what I didn't sign up for, but really it was my fellow directors who had the faith in me to take that role on. So they were the ones that were really asking me to take on the chair role at the time when I took it on, which was approximately about a year after I was originally on the board. So
Okay.
Yeah.
So again, in as much detail as you're able to share. So you've joined the board, you've been there for a year, and all of a sudden people are turning to you to take on the leadership role. What are you able to tell us about why people were turning towards you to take on that role and the challenges that were being experienced at the time?
Yeah, no, look, there's a fair bit about the history of what was called Freedom Foods at the time, back in 2020. It's now called Noumi. We had to change the name because we sold the cereal and snacks business, which actually had one of the brands was called Freedom Foods.
Yeah.
So we had to come up with a new corporate logo, brand, everything. And Noumi means nourish me. And that was adopted after we sold that business.
Yes.
So to get to the point of the turnaround, I guess what we had to do was embark on finding out exactly what we had, and that was really what 2020 was about. Overlay COVID during that period, which made it even triply or doubly tough. Getting into a turnaround is you really have to equip yourself with a whole bunch of things to get a turnaround going. One is certainly getting good expertise while you work out what you have and what to do. And so we were very fortunate in the choice of financial advisors and lawyers that we adopted to help us on the journey.
Yeah.
And MA Financial from a financial advisor perspective, PwC on accounting and cash flow management. We had ABL, which is Arnold Bloch Leibler, on restructuring and working for us on the class action. You have to have good advisors because it's a really intricate and tricky part of navigation that you have to go through.
Yep.
So that's probably one of the key things that we did very early on, and I'm super pleased with how those firms have supported us through that whole journey.
Yeah.
Probably the one other thing that I wanted to say up front, if it's right, Kalia, is you've got to have a premise, and the premise is this business really worth saving?
Yeah. Interesting. Yep.
And you really have to believe that there's a real reason for the business to exist. And what I mean by that is it business fundamentally and strategically filling a need for society, right? And in Noumi's case, it's incredibly clear back in 2020 that we had great operations, great facilities.
Yep.
We had some great products and we had great brands, but more importantly, we had customers that relied on us every single day.
Yeah.
And so with that as the backdrop, it's pretty easy to lean into a situation when you've got a fundamental business that deserves to live and thrive through a turnaround. So that was probably one of the things that we did really upfront, is dig into all of the assets and understand the business more fundamentally and work out which ones we kept and which ones we didn't.
Yeah.
And that was something that a fair bit of 2020 was about, just really understanding the business.
Goodness me. That is 2020 was a tough period for so many people. And so I almost didn't think about that period we were in, but it's interesting because it sounds like the board, the organization, all of the advisors are really trying to get a handle on the current state, on the
Yeah.
operations, on the brands, on the products, on customers, all of those sorts of things. But you're also doing this deep dive in a period of COVID.
Mm.
So I imagine there was a little bit more desktop research than there might have usually been. What was the impact there in terms of getting that real picture of the current state?
Yeah, look, fundamentally keeping the workforce safe was critical, and we
Mm,
came up and devised a system, like many corporates did, on how to do that in a safe way. So the
yes.
operations themselves were, well handled. But we did spend a lot of time in the office.
Mm,
I've got to say, a lot of long, very, very long nights, taking me back to my early 20s working that hard. But we certainly worked incredibly hard to get across the business in 2020. But look, the thing that when you are doing a turnaround, you've got to lay it out probably in four reasonably big categories. One is strategy.
mm,
One is, improving the operations. The other is the financial structure
yeah,
appropriate for what you're about to embark on in the turnaround?
yeah,
And the last one is people.
yeah, yeah,
And that was really something that the people here at Noumi have been fantastic through this journey. Like, we've got approximately 500 people that work at the company, and I'm super proud of all the people who've put in enormous effort to improve the business and grow the business. So getting the people on board is one of the key things here as well. So we came up with a moniker, which actually Michael, our CEO, was really responsible for
yeah.
this tagline, which is reset, transform, and grow.
Mm,
And when you break down the turnaround, it fits neatly into those categories where we spent a lot of time resetting the business, probably 2021.
yeah.
And then we were really about transforming the business 22, 23,
Mm,
and partly into 2024 as well. But we're just starting really the real growth.
yes.
So back into growth phase, and growing in across the various ways you can grow a food and bev business or a FMCG business. So
Yeah.
that's kind of a really good thing. You can get a really simple tagline that people can
Yeah.
get behind, and they understand why you're doing something. So communication, massive thing that you have to do. Well,
Interesting.
mm,
So I'm wondering in your role as a board director and then as a chair, there's two things I'd love to touch on. One, when you joined the board, and then within 5 seconds, really land in the chair role, and there's quite a bit to do. I'm wondering about your personal risk appetite and how, clearly, well, it says to me you've got a pretty high personal risk appetite, but I'd be interested in your reflections about that and in choosing to lean into this. Um, yeah, so maybe let's
yeah,
start there, and then I've got another query about that about just the role of the board as well. But yeah, just reflections about your personal risk appetite and taking this on.
a great question. I think the right answer is possibly not about risk, but for me, it's always about, are you doing the right thing?
Yeah, right. Hmm.
And in the situation of Noumi, I guess some people may have said, well, I've only been here a few seconds, none of
Mm,
this relates to me, and I probably don't need the stress in my life, I might leave. But I did ponder this question about doing the right thing, which is doing the right thing by your family or your other commitments. I
yes.
probably did not do the right thing by those,
Mm, okay.
because the time it's taken and the commitment it takes to do a turnaround, right?
Yes.
But
Yes.
doing the right thing as a director of Noumi at the time, as I saw it at the time, and I continue to see it, is they needed the skills that I had in special situations and turnaround
Mm,
to help the company through.
yeah.
So when you say personal risk appetite, probably, if you really do analyze that personal risk appetite, it was taking on a lot of personal risk, but ultimately it's fundamentally grounded on doing the right thing
Yes.
and, fixing the business. And I think that probably de-risks it, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think would I do it again? I think all directors have to sit back and say, well, what can they really do to help the business at any single point in the life cycle of a business? And you have to continually reappraise the value you bring to the table. And if you're doing the right thing by the business and acting in interests of the business as a whole, then yeah, you got to
Interesting.
hang in there. Hmm.
Yeah, and just because we started the story with your mum and dad's business, it does make me wonder if there'd been a Genevieve Gregor around for Ma and Pa Gregor's business, would there have been a different outcome? Mm.
Maybe it's generational too, right?
Yeah, true.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. So back in the
Okay, well, look,
70s is a very different time
that's
to
true.
now. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think I have an easier cultural environment to make an impact now than possibly I would have had in the 70s. So yeah.
yeah, that's true. That's true.
Mm, mm.
So the other part I wanted to dive into when you talked about the reset,
Transform and grow.
thank you. Can't read my own notes. I'd scrolled it down here. I'm like, what does that say? Reset, transform, and grow. And thinking about the board, I mean, the board's role, and particularly the chair's role during a crisis. So you've joined, and there is this crisis. Often, boards, unsurprisingly, and completely, boards they get in the weeds a bit more during a crisis, right? They get
Mm,
into the operations a bit more than a board would otherwise do. And then post crisis, whenever that might be. And it sounds like you're not actually quite post crisis yet, but you're out of the real,
mm.
you know, total crisis mode. I'm just wondering about your reflections on the board and as chair about getting your hands dirty and then about getting out the other side, because sometimes it's harder for boards to get out the other side and come back up to that governance level role. So I'm wondering about your reflections there.
Yeah, look, I absolutely agree with you. In a situation where the leadership team need more assistance,
Mm,
the board has to be more involved.
yes.
And I can say at Noumi, the board was, during 2020, 21, very involved, but
Mm,
in a really collaborative way. And I think that it's having the insight to when to step back so
yes.
that you can allow the leadership team or the full-time leadership team, which is the ELT or the executive leadership team, to bring, to be more front and center. And that's certainly happening now at Noumi.
Yes.
Under Michael's leadership, Michael Perich's leadership, he is certainly, more front and center, but I think, a crisis. And you can see it with other companies right now, the chair does step forward.
Mm,
And, I did that for a period of probably two years. And partly because what you have to do is divvy up the roles, if I could say that, so that the core business continues to function without getting distracted.
yes. Mm,
And so these other external non-core activities that occur where you might be engaging with financiers, you might be engaging with regulators and the like. It takes
mm,
an enormous amount of time, but then you have to run the business as well. So
mm.
divvying up that workload is actually part of what you have to do so that the whole thing keeps moving forward.
Yeah, right.
Mm.
Yeah,
And I
and
think
go.
I think one of the I was going to say one other thing that I keep saying it, and probably internally they're sick of me saying it, but restoring trust for all stakeholders.
Mm,
That's one of my key roles as the
yeah,
chair.
yes.
And, that's the stakeholders here are numerous, with lenders, convertible note holders, the
Mm,
market, the employees, the farmers, our customers, suppliers, and the regulator. It's about restoring trust and getting back to a normal relationship again. And that
mm,
takes more communication than normal. So you do need more hands at the wheel, if I can put it like that. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think more hands at the wheel, and also, as you say, in rebuilding trust, stakeholders expect, I would think, not just the operational side, not just
Mm,
inverted commas the CEO, not that the CEO is a minor player in this game, but the board is also a player in the game.
mm.
What else can you tell us about then your role as chair in that rebuilding trust process? What does that look like in practice?
I think culture is a key thing,
Mm,
and modeling behavior is also a key thing. So
mm,
if I take those two and break them down a little bit, we had to rebuild culture at so many levels, and we had to get accountability and creativity back into our business,
yes.
because we previously it was a command and control culture,
Hmm. Hmm.
centralized, and that's not, we had to create a safe place where employees could speak up
Yes.
and bring their best ideas and best efforts. So when you feel heard and appreciated, then you do your best work.
Mm,
And so we've been changing that culture, and I model that behavior. Michael models that behavior. The board models that behavior. It's really important that people feel safe to bring their best ideas to work.
mm,
Um,
mm.
and that's coupled with transparency. So
Yeah.
no matter how painful that first part of resetting the financials and disclosing write downs and things like that were back in 2020, that transparency was the first step to rebuilding trust, rebuilding culture. So everyone understood where we're at.
Mm,
And that was, transparency is absolutely key to any turnaround.
yes.
Um, so that's a few things. Probably the other thing that possibly is a skill, a key skill that I have, given my background working in financial services, is around the capital structure that was appropriate for us at the time.
Hmm.
And it was a bit of a challenge raising 300 million with that as a backdrop.
Yeah.
And we had to do that well. We had to do the work that
Mm,
supported the analysis around that capital raising, and the form of the convertible note and how it came about, and everything was, took a lot of time and a lot of effort. But it's been an excellent capital structure for us as we've done the turnaround,
yes.
and features like no cash interest payment in the first 2 years,
Mm,
um, things like that, to allow you to give yourself and the business time to rebuild itself.
yes.
So
Interesting.
having those ingredients to say, like, this is what those investors will need, and that's where having good advisors involved, and
Yeah.
having good um, you know planning around how to take that story to market is important.
Yes.
Mm.
Oh, so much in there I want to dig into as well. I just want to back to the question of culture and creating that safe culture. That is a big turnaround if you're going from, a command and control culture to hopefully an open, inclusive, transparent culture. I'm wondering for you at the board, how do you measure that? How do you know if you've got it right?
Mm. Yeah, we have, well, employee engagement surveys is one thing,
Yes. Yeah.
um, but just even walking the floor.
Mm,
So we've installed employee engagement, and we track that pretty closely, and we're looking for ways to improve that, and also give feedback and make sure we're
mm,
engaging with our workforce as well. But walking the floor, I actually really like talking to every level,
yeah. Yes.
and getting to know them personally, and making sure they feel they can raise things, and
Mm,
not, that the board is not a unapproachable,
Mm,
unknown quantity, if I could put it like that. You need to be
yes.
approachable and visible and,
Yeah,
willing to spend time getting to know people in the business. So
absolutely.
that culture, which all directors have been, definitely involved in, but also the leadership team as well, is really, understanding the workforce better.
Yes.
Obviously, it's always a continuous journey, and we've always got improvements to make. But certainly, that's been really pleasing when I can walk the floor and someone will pull me aside and say, I want to talk to you about X, Y, Z, and you feel their excitement about being at work. It's
Yeah.
incredibly rewarding. Yeah.
Interesting. And that
Mm.
takes trust. I mean, it's building trust from the workforce. It also takes trust from the CEO to allow the board, allow inverted commas, the
Totally.
board to be out and about, because that's a bit of risk for them as well about what the board might hear. So it's interesting. It is building trust on all levels in that way, or having trust at all levels in that way. Yeah.
You make an incredibly good point. I would say that when forming the relationship, the CEO chair relationship is critical.
Mm,
If it works, kind of everything works.
yes. Yeah. Yes.
And I have what I believe is the healthy board chair relationship with the CEO, but that is critical to any turnaround.
Yes.
Is knowing your roles, which roles you play, but also having real transparency between the two roles, because you are the fulcrum between the board and obviously the leadership team.
Yes.
So building that relationship was something that Michael and I invested on early on, and
Yes.
yeah, we do trust each other to be transparent with one another. So I think that regardless of the company is vital.
Yeah. Great. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, Genevieve, so much in here about your role, the board's role, the chair's role. What are the key points you want people to take away from the conversation that we've had today?
One that is not always said, but a crisis is not all bad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So done well, it can be, if you come out the other side, and we're still coming out the other side, but done well, it can be hugely rewarding at a personal level
Yes.
and from a career perspective. And you
Yeah.
can actually deepen relationships,
Yes.
and relationships grow in a crisis.
Yes.
Working relationships with your board colleagues, the leadership team. So I think it's not all bad.
Yeah.
And you can make some faster decisions because you do have to make decisions.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Interesting.
Probably the one that you asked me before, but about risk tolerance, but I think it's actually do the right thing for the business. Always seek good expertise,
Mm-hmm.
because it's hard. You can't know it all, and you shouldn't be expected to know it all. So get the right expertise around the table.
Yes.
Um, Obviously, transparency,
Yeah.
vital to restore trust, and you need trust to operate.
Yes. Yes.
Um, and something that you continually work on as a director, whether it's a functioning business or a turnaround business, but try and really understand the fundamental drivers of the business,
Yeah. Yes.
so that you've got to really work hard to really unpack the fundamental drivers. So if you do that, then you know where to focus and prioritize and all those good things. But yeah,
Great.
so I don't know. There are a few.
Yeah. No, I think that sums it up beautifully. And is there a resource you would like to share with the Take On Board community?
I have two. I have two podcasts that I think are excellent podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
Besides your good self, of course, something new is a podcast. It's called In Good Company,
Ah,
and the presenter is Nicolai Tangen, who is the Chief Investment Officer of the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is
ah,
NORGES, which happens to be the largest, I believe, public equity owner in the world.
yes.
And as
Wow.
a result, he is able to interview pretty much some of the top CEOs and chairs from major corporations around the world, and it's fascinating because they really understand their business because they're at the top of their game. So they're sharing all the things that I was talking about, which is strategy and, you know, people stories and things like that. So it's an excellent listen. And the other one is The Daily by the New York Times, which often you get snippets and, you know, you hear snippets about what's going on in the world, but The Daily really unpacks it over a 20-minute sort of thing, and you can really get into the history of how Gaza became Gaza, etc., or, you know, something like that. And it's very, very informative podcast. So there's two for you.
Fantastic. I know it's certainly not the New York Times one, but I'll be looking up In Good Company. We love a good podcast here.
Yeah, of course.
Genevieve, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to share and reflect on your experiences. So valuable to hear these stories. So thank you for taking the time to share your wisdom with the Take On Board community today.
Thank you, Helian, and really enjoyed the conversation. So thanks.